Nigeria's federal government has outlined its strategies for debt servicing and financing in 2024, with significant increases in both allocations compared to 2023. Now, as part of its strategy for servicing its debt obligations in 2024, a total allocation of 8.490 trillion naira has been made available, and this figure represents a significant increase from the 8.250 trillion naira budgeted for debt servicing last year. As part the financing plan, the federal government has outlined its strategy with a total allocation of 9.178 trillion naira. These are set to be contained in the budget details President Bola Tinubu presented to the National Assembly. At this point, to talk more on this, I'm being joined by Kassimu Garba Kurfi, CEO, APT Securities and Funds. Kassimu, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Nigeria's debt servicing bill is expected to actually reach 8.49 trillion naira in 2024, up from 8.25 trillion naira in 2023. And this increase reflects the country's growing debt burden. Now, if you compare the size that has been allocated to servicing debts and the budget, 27.5 trillion naira, is that a major inhibitor to fiscal growth and budget performance?
Yes, of course, because when you look at it, you will see that it's almost at parallel with what we are spending in the capital expenditure. And remember, capital expenditure are the expenditure that bring more productivity and enhance our structures on the ground. So if we are spending 8.7 trillion for the services of debt, it's hindering what we can spend in the capital expenditure. And definitely sure it's affecting our progress.
Now, this is my concern. The government plans to fund the debt servicing through a combination of domestic and external borrowing. And domestic borrowing will be primarily through the issuance of treasury bills and bonds, while external borrowing will be through Eurobonds and other international debt instruments. Now, is that a viably sustainable way to pay for what is owed? Or it's just a way of recurring more debt to pay off debts, as some people have actually speculated?
Well, we can say that in view of the fact that they made some relief from the fuel subsidy, and also due to the exchange rate, you can say that the government gets more revenue now. And that is why the portion we are spending for the services of debt, we are just talking about 45% compared to 85 to 90% that is currently being done. So if we can reduce it to 45% of our annual revenue, it is the way forward. But all the same, when you compare it with the debt that is coming in, don't forget recently the president signed a port contract about $8 billion. At the same time, we are also having more debt to be approved by the National Assembly. You will see that whatever we are spending now, it may not be sufficient enough in the very near future, because of the mounting, the increase that is coming into our debt. And this, the government have to be very careful, because we have to make sure that we did not reach the level that we cannot sustain it.
Yes, talking about increase in debt, Kassimu, a major highlight of the debt servicing plan is that the federal government will start repaying the 23 trillion naira it owes the Central Bank of Nigeria. So I'd like to find out, is that different from the 87 trillion naira already owed? And will this particular financing strategy mapped out by government in terms of borrowing, do you think it will be adequate enough in accommodating the payments to the Apex Bank as it also seeks to service its debt to international creditors and all other people that it owes?
Well, first, the fact that the federal government decided to pay up to 5 trillion to the means away, it means that the federal government may not likely going to use that means to borrow from the CBN. Because really, the situation we find ourselves, the inflation we find ourselves, due to the excessive borrowing from the CBN amounting to 23 trillion, which was just converted into debt. Now the government decided to say that 5.5 trillion will be set to reduce that one. We hope that they will not use that means away to borrow further again. And if they do that, that will give a big relief to the CBN and also to the economy. Because when the government competing with the other manufacturer and the individual into the same market, it means that denying them access to the debt and denying the expansion of the economy. But notwithstanding, the 5 trillion is only part of the 23 trillion that have already converted into debt, which was recently approved by the National Assembly earlier this year. So what we are saying, if you look at the debt now we are increasing is more of the foreign exchange debt. And this need to increase our services debt, even though we have a relief period, but we have to caution the government to be mindful of the huge debt that is increasing so that we may not take ourselves to the level that will not, even though they promise that they will see that the exchange rate reduced to 750 per dollar compared to 900 that is going on now. And if they can achieve that, that will be a relief to the economy and better for all of us.
All right. Now, the Nigerian government is also increasing its budget for capital expenditure in 2024 through borrowings. But we've seen decades, Kassimu, of borrowing to fund projects that has yielded next to nothing for years, if I could say decades self. Now, investors are said to be reserved about putting their funds into the Nigerian economy. So should government continue to borrow? You've also stressed the fact that there's a need for government to reduce its debt portfolio. Now, in terms of reducing its debts and borrowing, what do you think, or which area do you think the government should be looking towards? We can talk about the non-oil sector that has performed creditably, aside the oil sector also. So should government be looking at these areas in a way to increase more capacity when it comes to revenue generation and paying off its debt?
I think the government needs to liberalize the economy, then continue borrowing, doing the expenditures that the private can invest. Why should the government borrow and now repair the road? All this road, you can put the toll gate and allow the private investors to come and invest their money. And if they do this, they will realize enough revenue that is enough for them to pay their debt and have something to pay to the federal government. If the government follows those lines, I think that will reduce our exposure, because many of the projects that the federal government are going into, they could have allowed the private investors to go to. Why should you borrow to go and repair airport? Well, the airport, it can be leased to the private investors who can bring their own capital and also expand it. The same thing was road. So many of the projects, even the power, liberalize it as much as possible so that all this expenditure we are going into those major areas, we shouldn't go. At the same time, the government, they should also look at a business that currently they are holding into, they should liberalize it. Saudi Arabia have privatized their Aramco, that is Saudi Arabian oil company. Why can't you privatize NNPC? If we privatize NNPCs and LNG, I can tell you the government will get enough fund to reduce many of their indebtedness. At the same time, more capital will come into the country through participating into this business, and by so means, it will liberalize the economy to be much better, less burden to the government.
In all of these, Kassimu, there's this particular area that a lot of people have not really talked about. Of course, we understand that governments talk around increasing revenues to boost infrastructure development and stimulate economic growth. A same old saying, because it's something that we've heard over and over again, but then we still keep seeing a rise in the country's debt burden. Now, why has it been hard? Why is it that it has been hard for the administrations or governments to probe previous administrations when it comes to revenues, monies being generated and being expended for projects and all that? Most especially these funds that have been tied to certain projects, and we've not really seen anything coming from those areas. Now, some people have said that if the government is able to do that and recover these funds, they will be able to propel the budgets, fill the economy, and increase the government's fiscal stance or fiscal position. So, of course, we can talk about the former Attorney General, where billions of naira were said to have been mismanaged by him. We can talk about the 23 trillion naira that was printed by the CBN, of course, former governor. We can talk about Nigeria Air and the former aviation minister, Adi Sirika. And we know the stories surrounding all these, corruption, mismanagement, and embezzlement of funds. Why is it that administrations are not being able to probe these situations, bring the money back into the system, and fund the Nigerian economy and its budgets?
Well, the most difficult aspect is the civil servant. No any politician can succeed in duping the government money without the participation of the civil servant. And the civil servant remain in the system. And therefore, because they are within the system, they are the same civil servant that work hard to see that they cover them. It is very difficult because all government, year in, year out, they keep on proving and take us nowhere. Because those who are instrumental to these issues are still within the system. Most of these, the civil servants look at something that benefit them rather than they benefit the nation. Why can't you take Ibadan, Lagos into private hands? If you give that express road, a private one in 2 years, he can have 10 lanes by the right, 10 lanes by the left, and it will work. But the civil servant will hold it because they want contract and review and kick back and front, and therefore it takes us now 20 years without completing that road. So most of our means and ways that the government could have liberalized, the civil servant will not like to do that. Ordinarily, if the government can overhaul this and release this to the private investors, will be far better and ahead. There is no doubt in us. We all know where we are in the telecom. Today we are talking of 5G. Had it been the government, the civil servant are there, do you think we have reached there? The answer is no. Why is NITEM? So it goes across the board. Most of these institutions that the government is supposed to hands off, as we have witnessed in the developed market and the emerging market, we find it very difficult because of our civil servant. So, but the government, if they are bold enough, they can do, and those who are in charge, they can be proved. I see no reason. Somebody that you have evidence you cannot prove him. The government can prove them. The past General Buhari government proved the government before it. Nothing stopped this government to prove. The CBN governor, the accountant general, they were already in the court. So there is nothing stop the government doing it, except and unless if the will is not there. But if the will is there, they can do it and go beyond this. I believe that the government need to move forward, get all those revenue of a source of revenue and put them into within the tax regime and ensure that other expenditures liberalize them so that you allow the private participation so that we will be better off. Today in airline, we don't have Nigerian airline. How many Nigerian airlines are there are working? So we can go on and keep on privatizing this and allowing the foreign investors or the local investors to invest their money and make it better. If we do that, it will be better for the government, and therefore government will just rely on tax. Look at all our roads, no single toll gate. You go to Europe, you go to UK, you go to New York, you will see that toll gates are the day of the order. If you go to China, you see a lot of toll gates. Many of the roads are in the hand of the private investors. What stops Nigeria? I can assure you a private investors can build road from here down to South, down to Kano, in dualized form and with well security in order to realize their money from the toll gate. So let the government change and let the government come with the rule that will expand these means. And if we do that, achieving even $1 trillion is feasible and viable for the nation.
Okay, now we have domestic debts, including ways and means of about 5.499 trillion naira, and of course foreign debts to the tune of about 2.747 trillion naira. Now, the allocation of domestic debts, as we've seen, constitutes the largest portion of the debt servicing budget. But some financial analysts say that the focus should have been more on paying off foreign debt so as to easily attract more financial support from international creditors and partners. And of course, that would also help investors look at the Nigerian economy and probably improve their confidence in that regard. So what do you think about this postulation by some economists?
At the current situation, we better pay more attention to domestic, less to the foreign, because you need foreign exchange to pay foreign debt, and we don't have enough. So let's see that we expand our means of generating more foreign exchange. Already they have started seeing improvement in the production of crude oil. Also, we are expecting to see more in the agricultural export, and we want to see more in the mining sector. So when all these ways were open and we get our refinery back into production, so we have less dollar demand to import the refined product, then we increase more of servicing the foreign debt, not now. I think what the government did is right, and they should do it that way. But there after 2024, if all the refineries are working, the Dangote refinery are working, we need less dollar to import refined product, and we have more agricultural product and mine product that can export to purchase more dollar. The moment we have more dollar, what do we do to reduce our foreign debt?
Kassimu Garba, Kurfi, CEO, APT Securities and Funds, thank you so much for your insights on the show this morning.
So thank you for having me.